The last time people actually thought about keeping all of their money buried in a mason jar in the backyard or under their mattress was probably back in the Great Depression, 1929. Things have changed a lot since then. Back then, you actually did have to worry about whether your bank was going to be safe or not. But these days, everything's FDIC insured, and actually we rely on having banks and their services in order to do business. In this chapter, we'll talk about working with bank accounts. Everybody has at least one, if not more than one. We'll talk about how to write checks, how to transfer funds, and even how to take care of transactions that occur outside of QuickBooks in the real world. You had the option to add bank accounts during the Easy Step interview, but you can also add them later. If you're in business for some time, you'll most likely add new ones or make an account inactive at some time, so knowing how to work with them within an existing company file is a good idea. I have the file we've been working on open, but if you're just joining in, it can also be found in the Chapter 7 folder. Since I already have the chart accounts open, all I need to do is create a new account. I could go down to the account button on the bottom left, but in this case, I'm just going to press Control-N to create a new account. This brings up the option that says, what kind of new account do you want to create? And it's always only going to allow us to choose one account type. It's either an income account or an expense account or a fixed asset account, but it can't be more than one. In our case, we want to come down and choose the bank account option. If you ever need help, you'll notice that once you make a choice, it does give you an example on the right-hand side or a definition. Create one for each cash account, including petty cash, checking, savings, and money market. Notice that it does not include loans and it does not include credit card accounts. Those are separate types, and they actually have some different features. So this is a cash account for bank accounts only. Once I get that selected, I'll click Continue. And that opens up the new account form. It already says bank account at the top, and I could put in an account number if I wanted to track them that way, but I'm not going to. Instead, I just need to come down and create an account name. This doesn't have to be very fancy. It can be just business checking or business savings, or if you bank at more than one institution, maybe you want to use the name of the bank. I'm going to just put in business checking. Fairly simple, but sometimes simple is better because that's all the information I need. I also am not using sub-accounts. I could put in a description of the account, and that would be important if I had more than one account at the same institution of the same type. For example, I might keep multiple checking accounts, one out of which I write tax liabilities, another maybe I use for hardware purchases or assets. That's when it would become important to have a description. What I do need to have, of course, is a bank account number. So I will put in the bank account and the routing number. When we created accounts before, we noted that we could do some tax line mapping. As soon as I click on that, though, you'll see that it tells me there's an error. Routing numbers actually have to be 9-digit numbers. That's a requirement. And if you're not familiar with it, a routing number is actually the ID number of a certain bank. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to try entering the routing number again. Now if I try to click off, I get the menu instead of an error, and that's good news. Since I'm not actually relating tax categories to this, I'm going to change the setting from unassigned to not tax related. That way I can be sure that I'm not just missing the information, but that it actually doesn't belong. Then of course I can enter an opening balance by clicking the opening balance button. I'll go ahead and enter that. Notice that it does say statement ending balance. You should have your last bank account statement from which you're taking this information, as well as the statement ending date. My statement ending date was actually the end of last year. And then I can say OK. If you need to order checks or you want to be reminded to order checks, it's kind of nice that it says, remind me to order checks when I reach a certain check number. That's for those people who always forget, and then before you know it, you don't have any checks and you have to wait 2 weeks. You also, of course, can order checks that you can especially print from QuickBooks. They're formatted that way. That's an option, and you can learn more about that by clicking on the link. At this point, I want to create a second account, so I'm going to choose Save and New. There's my happy little reminder that's telling me it's more than 90 days old, and I'll just click Yes to go through it. And then I'm presented with a new account. Notice that it does recall what the account type was that I'm working on, so I don't have to enter that again. This time I'm going to do a business savings account. And again, I have to put in all of the relevant information. I'll also work with assigning the tax line code, so I know that I didn't just forget, and I am not going to enter an opening balance because I want to show you how to use the register instead. So for now, I'll just click Save and Close. That takes me back to my chart of accounts. It's also letting me know that I can set up online services. This actually is a great idea, but we're going to go over that in a different chapter, so I'll go ahead and say no at this time. Now I can look at the top of my list and see that both of my bank accounts have been added. I promised that I would show you how to add money to my savings account. So to do that, I'm simply going to double click on the entry for the account, and that opens the register. It gives me a date, and I'm going to change that date by typing in one that's a little bit later. And I prefer to use my Tab key to move through. So I'll press Tab. I'm going to delete the transaction number because this was actually an opening balance. I'm also not going to include a payee. What I need to do, though, is I need to always designate an account. If I go here, I can get my chart of accounts, and I can see what options I have. Now you'll notice that it kind of scrolls down to expenses because it thinks that you're writing a check or doing something like that. Instead, this was something that I started with. So I'm going to look at my equity accounts. And I'm going to start off with an owner's equity. I'll type something in the memo so I remember what this is. And in this case, it was an opening balance. And then, of course, I do need to go to the right-hand side and choose if this is either a payment or a deposit. I'm creating a deposit of $1,000. That's all there is to it. If I press Enter, it will save the transaction. And it does tell me that I'm posting to an equity account. Normally, you need to be a little bit cautious about that, but I know that that's what I'm doing, so I'll just say that that's okay. Now you can see that we have this transaction. Not only is the $1,000 deposit there, but it also shows our $1,000 balance. You can put in deposits or withdrawals from any of your bank accounts directly in the register if that's what you want to do. When you're finished with the register, it's just a window, so you can go to the upper right and close it out, getting us back to our chart of accounts.